Hello and welcome to Musings on a Galaxy. Having discussed my own thoughts regarding the new movie's announcement in my first episode, I asked my friend Matt Ty, another big Star Wars fan, what he thought. Here's what he had to say. Hello Matt. So, what are your thoughts on the current slate of upcoming Star Wars films?
Hi Aid. Thank you for asking. I was lucky enough to attend this year's celebration in London, but only for the Saturday, so I wasn't present for the announcement of the new films. I quickly became most intrigued with the film exploring the dawn of the Jedi. As a keen gamer, the success of the Knights of the Old Republic saga came to mind, and how much I enjoyed not only the games themselves, but the accompanying storyline. I bring this up because as part of uncovering Revan's true identity, the introduction of the ancient Rakatan species and their knowledge of the Force I found very compelling, especially when it's revealed that their technology predates the Republic by thousands of years. I would be keen to see if there are any nods to this, based on it not being canon. I'm more anxious about anything post-Episode 9, although the involvement of Daisy Ridley will bring some continuity and direction. I try to remain positive, as long as feedback on the sequel trilogy has been listened to.
I also thought back to the Knights of the Old Republic games, but of course Dawn of the Jedi is set some 20,000 years before that era, though it could lay the groundwork for that to finally happen later, if the Dawn of the Jedi is successful enough and well received by fans. Are you concerned that if the Rey film flops, Lucasfilm will once again cancel the other two announced films?
I believe that Lucasfilm and Disney have taken some time to reflect and gather feedback, and would hope that they would be able to make a success out of this next film with Rey. It looks like the direction is to take her forward as a Jedi Master, but as we know, the dark side is never far away. Whenever Force sensitives are trained, there is always that risk, and a threat to be explored again perhaps. I hope that some learning has taken place, and that Rey can be taken to a different place now she has defeated Palpatine and left her past behind her. My other thoughts are that they must have ideas that stretch across a trilogy, and if these can be brought together like the original and prequel trilogy, rather than the disjointed sequels, we may have a good thing on our hands. I wonder what nickname will be given to Rey's films, as the sequel's title is taken.
I must admit, the Rey film does sound like they want to do a new Jedi Order trilogy if the first one is successful, but they're hedging their bets in that regard. If they do decide to make a second then third film, I hope they'll take the time to develop them properly, rather than rushing them like they did the sequel trilogy. What do you think about the Dave Filoni film announcement? Have you been enjoying The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett?
In terms of Dave Filoni having a chance with the big screen, I'm excited for this. I have thoroughly enjoyed The Mandalorian as it has explored this era of the Star Wars universe, and bringing several animated characters to live action has worked well. I also enjoyed the Book of Boba Fett. Although having Din Djarin appear partway through was welcomed, I felt that it detracted from the series and was used to fill in some gaps. My hope is that the adaptation to a film won't have a negative impact on the characters and story.
It certainly sounds like Filoni wants to put a lot in his film, so fingers crossed he can do that without compromising the story. When did you first get into Star Wars?
I first got into Star Wars when the trailer was released for The Phantom Menace. This was back when trailers were only shown on TV or at the cinema itself, rather than being at our fingertips like they are today. I remember being intrigued, already being very fond of sci-fi and fantasy. This is when my dad came in, who still likes to remind me to this very day how he and my mum queued for the original films, as back then there hadn't been anything like Star Wars. My dad then made sure that we went to the cinema to see The Phantom Menace. I took a friend along, who didn't really enjoy the film, but I loved it, going back to see it several times. My dad then showed me the original trilogy before the release of Attack of the Clones, which helped to build my understanding of Darth Vader and filled in some gaps in my knowledge. The rest, as they say, is history.
So like myself, you probably have a better opinion of the prequel trilogy than most. I think the prequels have the better story, but the originals have a greater sense of fun. Do you prefer one or the other, or is it about even? And do you have a preferred watching order?
I do look kindly to the prequel trilogy as a whole. Growing up, they were the go-to films rather than the original trilogy. Looking back, I wonder if it was partly to do with looking forward to the release of Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, and being very aware of following the story of Anakin's fall to the dark side, and his general journey of being found, and exploring things like Force sensitivity and the Jedi during a period of peace. I agree that there is a greater sense of fun and light-hearted moments in the original trilogy, with attempts at this in the prequels. I think this could be more down to filming trends at the time and how George Lucas wanted the characters to be, especially as Han Solo is a bit shifty with some of his dealings. I think it also has to do with technological advances and the use of CGI in the prequel films, where you could have more scenes and content using CGI versus more intimate content and acting shown in the originals. In terms of a watching order, I like to watch them in chronological order, however I am fond of just picking one at random, rather than binging a trilogy.
The technology and budget of the prequels definitely allowed for a far greater scope. Lucas often says A New Hope is only about 60% of what he wanted it to be. If the original trilogy was made with today's technology, I imagine it would have a far larger scope, especially the original film, which was pretty low budget even compared to Empire and Jedi. I know that like me you were rather disappointed with the sequel trilogy. What do you think of it now, looking back?
Now that the sequel trilogy has been out for some time, I can safely say I remain disappointed with the end result. I would call myself a Star Wars fan who would normally be happy with anything Star Wars related, purely because it has the essence of the saga, but I feel the sequel films were just lacking in so many areas. Although Rian Johnson was praised by some people for attempting to do something different with The Last Jedi, I think a more cohesive trilogy could have been achieved had J.J. Abrams made the second film. It seemed to me like J.J. felt he needed to pick up the pieces following on from the bad reception that The Last Jedi received from most fans, which is why we had him trying to plug plot holes quite quickly, which he purely didn't have enough time to do without creating a 5-hour Rise of Skywalker film. One of the worst parts for me was when Poe turned to everyone and announced somehow Palpatine returned, where I'm sure something else could have been used, like a flashback to show more of how Palpatine gained this knowledge in the first place. Perhaps it's too much for me to have hoped for Darth Plagueis to have made an appearance on the big screen. When you look at revenue the sequels made, The Force Awakens did well, but I think it was always going to, as that film had promise amongst fans who could have had a film with nods and references to some of the novels and other material written after the original and prequel trilogies.
Yeah, 8 and 9 had seriously diminishing returns. I also heard that Lucasfilm pretty much told JJ what to do with 9, like it wasn't really his film, so he didn't get a real say what ended up on screen. I don't know how true that is, but when you look at how much free rein Lucasfilm gave Rian Johnson after the box office success of 7, it definitely feels like they regretted that after the backlash following the release of 8.
Yeah. In summary, I feel the characters could have been written and portrayed better. For example, I became less of a fan as soon as Kylo Ren removed the helmet, and was thoroughly disappointed that there weren't any proper lightsaber duels in The Last Jedi. I almost thought it was going to happen when Luke appeared to face Kylo Ren, and afterwards I just thought, was that it? I am intrigued to see where things will go now, and have some excitement that Daisy Ridley will reprise her role, and hope for an improved sense of continuity moving forwards.
I definitely echo a lot of your sentiments there. Chris Terrio, who wrote Episode 9 with JJ, said they asked Lucasfilm if they could do an Episode 10 too, which was essentially an admission that both Episodes 7 and 8 had wasted so much time that they had to squeeze everything into 9. Of course Lucasfilm said no, and as a result Episode 9 has a breakneck pace throughout. I think they could have streamlined the plot a lot, removed the whole dagger nonsense and found another way to show Rey's healing powers. Oddly enough, I thought it would have been cool to see Leia use the healing power in Episode 8, after that missile hit her ship, tearing it open. It would have been great to see a shield drop between her and the breach, and for her use the Force to pull back the few crew members that were sucked out into the vacuum of space, pulling them through the shield to safety, then use the Force to heal them, collapsing with exhaustion afterwards. One power I really couldn't get behind in Episode 9 was the Force teleportation, that just felt silly. Then it was suddenly explained away that Rey and Ben were a dyad in the Force, which was then left otherwise unexplained. There were so many missed opportunities in that film. Explaining how the Emperor returned wouldn't have taken much time, and would seamlessly allow the explanation as to how Rey is his granddaughter to be told. I mean, some things can be left as mysteries, but that needed explaining, and it was left for the novelization to cover. It's ridiculous how much of that trilogy required the reading of various books to understand, but then Lucasfilm retconned a bunch of stuff from The Force Awakens and Last Jedi visual dictionaries after Rise of Skywalker came out. I hope the new Rey film utilizes the opportunity to address such shortcomings, and would like to see it finally confirm Finn's Force sensitivity on screen, which was another big missed opportunity from the trilogy. To have 2 new Force users throughout the trilogy instead of 1 could have been really fun and interesting.
I think the same. It actually felt rushed and it shouldn't have, while other areas were dwelt upon unnecessarily. I think they'd finished filming The Last Jedi before Carrie's passing, so they could have certainly utilized her more in that film as well as exploring her Force powers, rather than just have her drift back to the ship after the breach. That definitely would have avoided a lot of unintended laughter in the cinema. Thanks for your time, Matt, it was a pleasure. What do you think of the recent movie announcements? Feel free to share your comments, either here or on my Facebook page, Musings on a Galaxy Star Wars Discussions Call. Thanks for listening.